Hey y'all, so today we're going to talk about 3 easy tests you can use to see if your idea is ready to be turned into a nonprofit. Let's get started. Hey y'all, it's Tiffany here with Boss on a Budget. I help new and small nonprofits get up and running. If you need help going through your startup journey as a nonprofit, please subscribe to my channel. I drop a video every week. Also, if you're interested in starting your own nonprofit, check out my nonprofit startup checklist. It guides you through all the different phases of starting a nonprofit. And I also just released a workbook which accompanies that checklist, which guides you through that process. It gives you the help and the kick you need to make sure you get all those things done in the checklist. So just check out all of my resources in the description box below. But today I want to talk to you about, let's just get to the meat of it. I want to talk to you about how to know whether or not your idea is ready for prime time. So you have an idea in your head and you're just not sure whether or not it's good enough to move kind of in that phase where you can start doing your paperwork and start gathering your board and all of that. The first thing I'll say is I already did a video on deciding whether or not you should have a nonprofit versus a for-profit, so I'm not really going to touch on that today. I really want to talk to people who pretty much know they want to have a nonprofit, but they want to make sure that their idea is solid enough to move forward. So I'm going to give you 3 tests to figure that out, 3 questions you can ask yourself to figure out, am I ready? So the first question you should ask yourself is, am I doing this for me or am I doing this for the community? Or did it come from the community or did it come from me? So a lot of people I've talked to over the years have said, I'm so interested in starting this nonprofit because this person in my life passed away and this would mean a lot if I did this in their honor, or someone I know or I have dealt with this, or I just was taught this as a young person and I just feel like I need to teach this to someone else. So a lot of times when people start nonprofits, they come from a place of what is meaningful to them or what made a difference in their lives. And I'm not saying that that's not important, but that is not enough to decide whether or not you should go through all of the steps it takes to start a whole nonprofit organization, because it's a lot of work, a lot of administrative burden and paperwork to get your nonprofit going and to keep it successful. So it has to be more than that if you want to move forward with having a whole organization. So instead of worrying about or thinking about, oh, this matters to me, so this has to matter to everyone else, start with your community. So your community could be a geographic community. It could be people who have who are like-minded or who have similar experiences. When I say community, it could mean a bunch of different things. But go there. Go to the people who you would typically be serving or people you feel like would be compelled to give to support that community, and test out your idea and make sure it's something that's actually needed. Make sure it's compelling enough that people actually care about the issue. So an example I've used before is my grandmother taught me how to sew, and it's an important skill. So I feel like it's a skill that did a lot for me. So other people should learn how to sew, and we should have a nonprofit that's centered on learning how to sew. And I'm just going to say, with that idea just alone, it's really not enough to compel other people to give. Now, it may compel people who had similar experiences, but it may not matter for the people who you're trying to target. Maybe you're trying to target teenage girls or even teenage boys, and it may be important for people who are older, but for them, it just is not latching on or isn't as important to them. So you really need to test your idea, first of all, to make sure that there's a market for it, to make sure people actually would need or want those services, and to make sure it would be compelling enough so that people would be actually persuaded to want to give or to support. The second test you can use and you can ask yourself is, how will I be different, or how will this organization be different from everyone else? So if you go on a lot of online forums and you dare to say, I want to start a nonprofit, what do you think? Most people are going to tell you, don't start your nonprofit. It's too many nonprofits. It's too much competition. There's already not enough money to go around. Why would you want to do that? Blah, blah, blah. I don't agree with that. I actually think that there's plenty of room for people to start their nonprofits, but it's plenty of room for people who have a solid idea and people who have the backing that they need, who have done their research to be as effective as possible. So, too many people start their nonprofit without even understanding what the differences are between nonprofits and for profits, without even understanding that they're going to have to be heavy on fundraising and communications and marketing without being fully prepared. That's my beef. I don't have a beef with people who start nonprofits. I have a beef with people who do it without doing the proper research. So that's why I created this video. But back to the question, how will you be different? You have to think about your community. And again, your community could be geographic, it could be people who are similar, and think about what already exists in that community. What can you do to stand out ahead and above everything else that already exists? So there are a couple of ways you can look at that. Is there a population that's being ignored? Maybe a nonprofit is doing a service, but they're not particularly catering to a population that really needs them. Or maybe they're so generic that they don't really have the expertise or the time to kind of niche down and serve a special population. Or maybe there's a part of a service. So they're doing one service, but there's another complementary service that can be provided that they're just not doing. So you can come in and provide that service, and you don't have to do that just as a nonprofit, but you could start a nonprofit and provide a complementary service for something that's not being done in your community. So the point is, you have to understand, is there a gap? Is there something missing? And how can I fill that gap? But it's also about, if you want to do something similar, how will you be different in providing that service? How will you be unique? How will you be the shining star or the bright spot in a sea of people who do things all the same way or have the same approach that may not be effective with the same kind of people or the same kind of thing that you're doing? So here's an example. Food banks. There are food banks all over the country, and most communities have like a food bank. Well, maybe you want to do a similar type of service, but you want to do it for a population that general food banks just don't serve. So for example, what if you want to serve people who are suffering with the HIV virus, right? Maybe they have special diets and the food that's normally donated to food banks just doesn't work. So you want to set up a specialized food bank for that particular population. Or what about people who suffer with food allergies? So I suffer with food allergies, and a lot of things that people would donate to the food bank, like peanut butter or things with milk in them, I just can't eat. It's life or death for a lot of people. So maybe you want to start a food bank that is a specific need for people who suffer with food allergies. So that's an example of how you can take a service that's already being provided, but you can focus on a population that's being ignored or people just aren't paying attention to. Another way you can think about it is, there's a part of the chain that's missing. So maybe you want to serve people before they get to the point where they need the food bank. Maybe the issues that lead people up to having to go to a food bank and have to stand in line, maybe you want to address that earlier on in the process, because food banks aren't doing that. Some food banks aren't doing that. So some are not really addressing the core issue, the root issue. So you want to kind of back it up and say, hey, if we serve people at this point in time, we can even prevent that from happening. And to me, that's more compelling. That kind of makes you stand above and beyond, because I can understand that. Well, why do we have to give food? Why don't we help people so they don't even have to get there? That can be part of your ask. That can be part of whatever fundraising campaign that you have. So just think critically about, in this sea of nonprofits that already exist, that already provide services, how can you be different? How can you stand out? How can you be a bright spot? And again, I'm going to say that I do not agree that all nonprofits who are covering certain geographic areas serve all the people that need them. There's a bunch of research about particular issues or particular groups that are constantly ignored, or there are disparities like in race, there are disparities in gender. There are all kinds of things or areas where people are just being overlooked. So there is a space for you, so don't let that stop you, but think critically about how you can be unique in the space and how you can stand out and be different. The third test you can use to figure out whether or not your idea is ready for prime time is to ask yourself, what is the true impact of the services that we want to provide? So, a lot of times when people start out, they focus on the activities, but not the outcome, right? So, they focus on, well, we want to provide these classes or we want to provide these services, give socks to the homeless, but they don't think far enough or talk about their idea in terms of, if we do this, this is a positive impact or positive outcome we will have as a result of doing our activities. And when you find that when you start fundraising, so when you start filling out grant applications, funders want to hear you talk in terms of impact. What kind of changes are you making? What kind of change have you already made? When you start reaching out to donors, you're going to be much more effective if you can build a compelling story that talks about how and why your activities made a difference in someone's life. So you're going to have to flip that into, this made all the difference in the world for this person. Because we provided this services, now this person can do this, or this person can be this. So you have to get in the mindset of talking about outcomes and impact instead of just focusing on activities. So the example that I used before about the food bank was, what if you want to provide food for people who suffer with allergies? So let's think about the long-term impact of people who can't get access to food that's safe for them. So it could be life or death, right? It could cause death for some people. Some people may have to be hospitalized, or their life is forever changed. They can't be self-sustainable. They can't keep jobs. They can't support their families because they can't have access to safe food, right? So it impacts people when something is missing in their life or when they can't get access to something in their lives. And if you can be that bridge, then that's the story that you can tell to people to make them feel like, oh, you're right. If this doesn't happen, this will happen to this family. Or if we don't provide this service or we don't help, this family would be lost. Another example is, a lot of people want to create homeless shelters or transitional homes for people. And you can talk about it in that way. So you can say, we want to provide homes for the homeless, but it would be way more compelling if you said, we want to take care of the basic needs of people who need us. So we know that when we don't have to worry about if we have a roof over our heads, where our food is coming from, then we can focus on our families. That can prevent child abuse and neglect. That can prevent emotional distress or mental health issues for people. So you have to think in terms of the bigger impact. What's the bigger story that makes a difference for that person, for that person's family, for society as a whole, whoever your target population is. So make sure that whatever idea that you're tossing around has some kind of impact, and you can be able to articulate that, because that's going to make all the difference in the world. That's going to be able to help you build a strong core of supporters, build a strong core of donors and funders who want to get behind you. So I hope that was helpful. If you need help with fleshing out your idea, come visit me at www.bossonabudget.com. I would love to help you. And again, check out the links in the description box below, and I will see you in the next video.